This lecture is over outlining. We have so far this semester looked over a little bit about the informative speech and a little bit about organization there. We've looked at audience analysis, the place to start. We've looked at topical development, so we've got some of the building blocks. The next step, once you have your audience figured out and you have your topic decided upon, and a little bit about your organization and your purpose, now we get into outlining. There are two phases within an outline. You have what's called a working outline and a speaking outline. A working outline is an in-progress document. Sometimes it's going to be written out as full text. Other times it will be a bit more scattered, but it's in progress. It's the rough draft. It's not the completed and final document. So you use this in practice, and then you edit and you change things. Ultimately, you end up with what's called a speaking outline. This is the outline you use on the day of your speech. So it's got fewer details than your working outline, most likely. All of your ideas are there, but they're in a condensed form. In this class, we do what's called extemporaneous speaking. Extemporaneous means you have outlined notes instead of a full manuscript. So that's why they're in a condensed or abbreviated form on your speaking outline. There are different approaches to a speaking outline in extemporaneous speaking. You have a sentence outline format, which is where each and every line within the body of the speech is a full sentence. This is not a full script. The intention with the full sentence outline is that you have those full sentences. You may read that or memorize it, but then you continue talking about that subject after you've read that tagline, that full sentence. When you need very precise wording within your speech, that may be a reason that you use the full sentence format. Otherwise, what I tend to see among novice speakers is that they just read the sentences and move on. And instead of the speech being 5 minutes, it may end up only being 2, because your intent had been to elaborate on those sentences, but then you only read what was on the page. So I typically do not recommend the sentence outline initially until you get more comfortable as a speaker. Then you have the phrase outline format. This, as you can see, there are short statements to get the idea across. It's what I recommend to you. This is typically what I use when speaking. You write your thoughts down in the form of incomplete sentences. And the reason I suggest this is because you can't just read an incomplete sentence and then stop talking. You will be forced to complete the sentence off the top of your head. And if you've been forced to do that, then you are more likely to continue talking as you need to elaborate on your points. And the third one here is keyword outline format. This is where you use only keywords or only trigger words within the outline. And whereas it does allow the most freedom in the speech, it also allows for the most opportunity to forget what you meant to say. So again, I don't recommend this one for novice speakers. The phrase outline format is typically my recommendation. Once you become an advanced speaker and you've had some experience and you understand how your brain works in that environment, you may find yourself using a healthy mix of all three of these, where you'll have some sentences, some phrases, and some key words. Any good speech is going to be made up of 3 parts: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. And they should all be very distinct and clear. The introduction has a variety of purposes. And as you see here, there's just kind of a quick list of them. You won't do all of these with every speech. You're always going to try to grab their attention in some way, and we'll get into what that looks like. You'll always introduce your topic, and your purpose is implied. You won't necessarily say that out loud. You'll preview what points you'll cover within the speech, but these last two may or may not be relevant to your speech, depending on what type of speech you're delivering. Motivating the audience to accept your goals may or may not be important. And making the topic relevant may or may not be important as well. So as parts of the introduction, you have that attention-getting device that you'll basically always do, and you can see a list of things that you might or might not use. If you're going to use humor, make sure that it's always relevant and make sure that it is appropriate for the audience. Really, with any attention getter, you need to make sure that it's relevant to the topic that you're discussing. Make sure that it's related. You may use an anecdote, which is a brief story. You may use statistics. And as it says there, startling statistics are good things. To be startled means to be scared or frightened or to be shocked. And so a startling statistic is a good way to grab people's attention. Rhetorical questions can be useful. These are questions that do not require a response from the audience. You may also choose to refer to the occasion, talking about why you all are here and anything that's relevant to the occasion or to your audience, tying it back into the speech itself. And establishing common ground is sometimes also useful. If there's anything that ties you directly to the audience or a situation that you've all been in or something like that that ties into the speech, you can use that as an attention getter. Another thing you're going to do within the introduction is establish credibility. Make it clear why the audience should trust you on this subject. Now, in your speeches in this class, it will sound something like this. For the last few weeks, I've been doing my research on this subject. That may be all you say. You'll write it into a complete sentence. You may only have one sentence that establishes your credibility. Once you get out of school, you have your degree, you're in the workforce, things along those lines, you're going to have some credibility behind you. For now, all you've got, in most cases, is going to be just the research you did for this assignment. You'll also state the thesis statement in the introduction. Remember, that's the backbone of the speech. It needs to be very clear what the speech will be about. You'll preview your main points. This will need to be separate from your thesis statement. Write it out as a full sentence, specifically mentioning each point that you will cover. Once you've covered all of this, you need to transition into the first main point. And it can be as simple as what you see there on the slide, my first point. The transitional phrase in a speech doesn't have to be long and flowery like it is in an academic essay. The transition part really is just that tag, like you see there, my first point, my second point, my third point. Moving on, next. Those are all transitional words, and so you can use those as long as it is clear where you're going in the speech. Within the body, this is going to be the longest part of the speech. All of your main points are going to be explored here. Remember to keep them clearly organized. Most, if not all, of your supporting evidence will also go into this section. So your sources that will be required for your informative and persuasive speeches, they will, for the most part, be in the body. You might use a source as an attention-getting device. So it will either be there or it will be in the body, or actually both. You will not put any sources into your conclusions. It doesn't belong there. Between each major point, you will need to transition. So again, it can be something like you see there, my next point. Finally, moving forward. It can be something that simple. It could be slightly more complex. then once you're finished with all of your points in the body, you transition into the conclusion, and you can use those beautiful words right there, in conclusion, or to conclude, or to wrap up things today. Something along those lines, but it needs to be very clear you're moving into the concluding thoughts of the speech. You may be tempted to just stop whenever you finished your last point in the body, but the conclusion is very important. The conclusion is meant to give closure to the audience, to remind them of what just happened, what you've talked about, tie everything together, whether that's your attention getter or some story you told within your speech or some bit of information. You're going to tie it all together here in the conclusion. In a persuasive speech, you will use what's called a call to action, which is when you tell the audience what to do next. When they leave your presence, this is what you hope they'll do. You will not do this in an informative speech, only in persuasion. So this is what your conclusion will be made up of. You'll restate your thesis as its own sentence. You'll restate your main points as their own sentence, and make sure to review each point specifically. And then you will finish up with a declarative statement. You don't want to finish up with something like a thank you or a that's it or I'm done, and that may be tempting. All it takes is prior planning. You want to plan out how you're going to finish up your speech. In informative speaking, you might use a tie back to your attention-getting device. So in other words, you'll just bring it up one more time, mention it again, tie it all together. Or in the persuasive speech, you're going to be using a call to action. As you're writing out your speech, remember you're typically going to be using phrases, but if you need to write down a full quote from a source, that's okay. Write down those citations, those quotes, or even paraphrased information, and then write out the oral citation, or how you plan to give credit to the author or publication that you are citing. So write it down as you plan to say it. And for the purposes of this class, if you have to read those source citations directly from a page, I'm okay with that. Make sure you know for sure which source is tied to which quote or information. Keep up with it as you go. And then for this class and most academic classes, if you are using sources, you're going to need to create a separate page for your citations. This is either called a reference page or a bibliography, which is what I call it, or a works cited page. Another thing that you can add to your outline is a delivery cue or a set of delivery cues. Remember that a cue is an indicator. This is something that indicates when you, as the speaker, should do something. So if there's some point that you want to get really loud and start yelling at people, you might give yourself a note. If there's a place where you want to pause for dramatic effect, you might make a note of that. Oftentimes these are added on your own outline, handwritten into the margin or something like that after you've printed it, after you've begun practicing. I do not have to see those delivery cues. So in other words, you don't have to tell me where you put those. Those are for the speaker. I don't require you use them. They are just a very handy tool for a speaker.